My mom said she found love again, then helped him destroy every inch of my father's legacy. But when they touched the last thing we built together, I made my move. My mom sided with my stepdad and his two kids, kicked me out of the house I grew up in, and called it a fresh start. What she forgot, what they all forgot, is that legally, the house belongs to me. And now I'm taking it back. You'd think it would be a blessing when your dad prepares everything for the future. Turns out, it was the fuse to a slow-burning bomb that blew my entire family apart. My name's Ryan. I'm 36, a lead systems architect for a major tech company in Denver. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be gearing up for a legal war against my own mother, I'd have laughed in your face. But everything changed after Dad died. Dad wasn't a tech guy, not really. He ran a historic restoration business, Tidehammer Construction, famous for saving 19th-century buildings around Colorado Springs. The man had a sixth sense for trends. While others were chasing fast money, Dad quietly built a reputation on two things: brutal honesty and impeccable craftsmanship. He always said, "People remember how you make them feel, not just what you build." The house he bought in '97 after his first big project was his pride and joy, a two-story colonial revival with white trim and a wraparound porch that smelled like cedar and motor oil. The garage was his sanctuary, every tool labeled, every shelf built by hand. That space taught me more than any coding boot camp ever could. I didn't understand the gravity of Dad's rituals back then. The Sunday barbecue routines, the handwritten maintenance logs, the way he took time to show me how to change filters, clean gutters, check water lines. He used to joke, "A house is like a relationship. You ignore the small stuff, and one day, the whole thing collapses." I didn't know he meant more than just property. Emily, my wife now, met me at a local coding competition during college at CU Boulder. She was all ambition and sharp wit, a business major who somehow saw charm in my sleep-deprived rambling about JavaScript frameworks. The first time Dad met her, he said, "She anchors you. Don't screw this up." He loved her like a daughter from day one. Dad helped her get her first few clients when she launched her brand consulting firm, introduced her to local business owners, shared his contract templates, even mentored her over beers on the back deck. I think he saw in her a kind of mirror image of himself, driven, principled, unafraid to take risks. We spent every Sunday night at their house. He'd grill. We'd talk about code and concrete. It was simple. It was good. Then came the call. I was in a client pitch meeting when Mom rang. She never called during work hours. When I picked up, all I heard were gasps and broken sobs. "Your dad, he collapsed. On site. He's gone." The autopsy said heart attack. He was only 59. Everything after that was a blur. The funeral, the casseroles, the dozens of people telling me stories about how Dad changed their lives. A plumber said Dad helped him pay for his daughter's braces. One of the bricklayers cried as he told me about Dad staying late to train him on how to work with 150-year-old stone. The man was a giant, not just in business, but in every soul he touched. When we sat down with his lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, he opened a thick folder labeled Legacy Plan. Color-coded files. Notes in Dad's blocky handwriting. Instructions for the business, the house, even backup succession plans. Dad thought of everything. And then came Steve. He was 60, balding, wore loud shirts and louder cologne. Mom met him in a grief support group 3 months after Dad's death. At first, she only mentioned him in passing. "Steve says the first year is the hardest. Steve recommends this book." He was always just Steve, until suddenly, he was your stepfather. 6 months after Dad died, Steve moved into the house, along with his adult kids, Mark, 33, and Kelsey, 31. They called it bringing joy back into the home. I called it erasure. They gutted the garden Dad spent 15 years cultivating, replaced the handcrafted bookcases in the living room with particle board IKEA nonsense. Steve started talking about open concept kitchens and raising the property value. And Mom, she let him. She stopped mentioning Dad at all. Started saying things like, "It's time to move forward." She even laughed when I reminded her of Dad's maintenance logs. "Let it go, Ryan. It's just wood and memories." But it wasn't. It was him. And they were destroying it. What happened next shocked everyone and changed our family forever. I stopped visiting after they painted over the growth chart on the kitchen doorway. That doorway recorded my entire childhood, little notches with dates next to them, From the time I was barely tall enough to reach the fridge to the year I beat Dad's height by an inch. Every birthday, he measured me there with a grin and a Sharpie. Then one day, it was gone. Just drywall and a new coat of beige. We had to repaint. It was getting dingy, Mom said, not even meeting my eyes. Kelsey chimed in from the other room. It wasn't aesthetic. I nearly walked out right then. But that wasn't even the worst part. While I was away on a 3-day business trip in San Francisco, Steve held a garage sale. Not just any garage sale, the kind that made my stomach twist when Emily texted me a blurry photo of it from a friend who lived nearby. I zoomed in. That was Dad's bandsaw. His antique lathe. The hand-carved workbench we built together. Sold for pennies to strangers. When I confronted Steve, he shrugged. We needed room for Mark's gym setup. Those old tools were just collecting dust. That gym setup turned out to be a CrossFit nightmare. Rubber mats, kettlebells, some douchey mirror with AI tracking. It smelled like protein powder and disrespect. I tried talking to Mom, reminding her that every item in that workshop had a story. She looked up from her tablet and said, "It's just stuff, Ryan. Don't get dramatic." That line echoed in my skull. Don't get dramatic. As if I were mourning a chair instead of the man who raised me. Then came the built-in bookshelves. Dad's final project before he got sick. We spent an entire fall cutting, staining, measuring. Each shelf was perfectly fitted to match the curvature of the 1910 walls. It was the last time he let me help. Said, "You've got my hands, Ree. You just need my patience." I showed up one weekend to find contractors ripping them out. Sawdust everywhere. Steve standing there with a coffee, gesturing like a foreman on a HGTV set. "We're going for a more modern vibe," he said, barely looking at me. This was ancient. My pulse was in my ears. "Did you get permits for this?" "This house is historic. Any structural changes have to go through the city." Steve grinned. "Your mother and I live here. We don't need your permission." But they did. Because the house legally belongs to me. Dad left it to me in his will. Not to Mom. Not in trust. Just me. When I reminded him of that, calmly, trying not to explode, he said, "Look, son," putting this oily emphasis on the word, "we've improved this place. Raised its value. You're welcome." I left shaking, teeth grinding. Emily told me to cut off visits entirely. "They're using your love for the house against you," she said. "Let them hang themselves." But it only got worse. Mark started sending me invoices, literal bills, for their renovations. Vinyl flooring where Dad had painstakingly restored original hardwood. LED panels replacing antique Edison fixtures. And he expected me to reimburse them. Kelsey turned the upstairs reading nook into a home office and claimed she needed privacy when I stopped by to drop off tax documents. She said it with this performative sigh, like I was intruding. Steve cornered me in the dining room one night while Mom was out. "Since we live here, and you don't, we were thinking it's only fair if our names are added to the deed." I laughed. He didn't. I reminded him again, Dad paid off the mortgage. No one here pays rent. Taxes? Covered by me. Insurance? Me again. Maintenance? Guess who? His response? "We've put sweat equity into this place. That counts." Mom backed him up, of course. "Steve knows real estate, Ryan. Let him guide you. You're too attached to the past." The past? The past raised me. Built this house. Paid for your grief counseling. And somehow, now, it was an inconvenience. I sat in Dad's old leather chair that night, the one they hadn't dared touch, and stared at the home that no longer felt like mine. They were slowly erasing him. One shelf, one mark on a doorframe, one beam of cedar at a time. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot who the house legally belongs to. And I've just decided, I'm not going to be polite about this anymore. I used to believe I was too logical to be manipulated. That was before I watched my mother cry in front of me while defending a man who was gutting my father's legacy with vinyl plank flooring and ego. But it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like I was the villain in her new fairy tale. Like I'd turned into the bad guy just for asking them to respect the man who built the walls around her. The moment everything truly snapped, though, wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No thrown dishes. Just a phone call. Emily had been gently urging me to consider renting out the house. "It's appreciated nearly 40% since your dad passed," she said one night after putting our daughter Emma to bed. "That kind of return could pay for her college, you know?" I brushed it off. It felt like betrayal. But then she said something that stuck. "You're holding on to a house you can't even step into without getting heartburn. That's not honoring your dad, it's punishing yourself." So I called my financial advisor. Ran the numbers. And the numbers, they didn't lie. This house wasn't just my father's legacy. It was a time bomb of financial liability, emotional warfare, and legal gray areas. And it was time to make a decision. When I told Mom I was considering renting it out, she lost it. "You can't do this to us," she shrieked over the phone. "This is our home." I asked. "Since when?" "Steve has poured his soul into this house," she snapped, completely bypassing the fact that Steve had literally poured his coffee onto my dad's antique rug 2 weeks ago. "He's made improvements. He's brought life back here." I reminded her calmly, at first, that I hadn't approved a single change. That legally, the house was mine. Her answer? "You're just bitter and stuck in the past." And then Steve called. The tone was different this time. No smarmy chuckles. No fake warmth. "Listen here," he said, voice low and tight. "You're grieving, and I get that. But you can't just bulldoze our lives because of a deed. We live here. We've made a home." I let him talk. He went on about sweat equity, about family, about how Emma should know her grandmother. Then he said it. "Your dad isn't here anymore, Ryan. Maybe it's time you accept that." And something in me broke. I didn't scream. I didn't even curse. I just remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I was 12. Dad and I were sanding the rear fender on the Mustang. I'd messed up, used the wrong grit, took off too much primer. I was crying, terrified he'd be mad. But he just set down his tools, knelt beside me, and said, "This is how you learn. One layer at a time. You make mistakes, you fix them. But you don't ever let someone else paint over your work and call it theirs." I could hear his voice like it was right next to me. Calm, firm, full of love. So the next day, I drove to the house. They were renovating the dining room, ripping out the original crown molding that Dad had milled himself to match the early 1900s style of the home. It was one of the first projects we documented together, in this leather-bound notebook he used to call the playbook. Steve was holding a level. Mark was measuring. Kelsey was scrolling Pinterest. "I need you all to stop what you're doing," I said. They didn't even look up. Then I said it again, louder. "You have 2 weeks to leave." Mom dropped her paintbrush. "You're evicting us?" "No," I replied. "I'm reclaiming my home." That's when everything erupted. Mom screamed. Steve shouted. Kelsey actually started crying, throwing out lines about how unfair this was, how Lisa, her half-sister, was pregnant and needed stability. When I said that Lisa was not my stepsister, Steve lost it. Started pacing like a caged animal. "You're tearing apart a family, you entitled little." I didn't flinch. "Dad gave me this house for a reason. You're going to throw a pregnant woman out on the street?" Mom yelled. "She's not pregnant with my child," I said. "She's not even related to me." The emotional manipulation came hard and fast after that. Aunts, cousins, church ladies. Even my old high school English teacher texted me saying God wouldn't approve. They all tried to guilt me into submission. But I didn't back down. And the next move I made changed everything. They thought they could break me with guilt. They didn't know they were just pushing me deeper into resolve. 3 days before the eviction deadline, I pulled into the driveway and saw something that made my stomach drop. A crowd. Neighbors, extended family, church members, even some of Dad's old business partners. They stood on the lawn like protesters, holding clipboards, murmuring amongst themselves, some even holding handwritten signs that read, "Honor thy mother," and "Families don't evict families." I didn't understand what I was walking into until I stepped through the front gate. An intervention. Chairs were set up in the front yard like some twisted therapy circle. My mother stood in the center, wringing her hands, eyes already puffy. Steve was beside her with that smug air of self-importance, holding a folder as if this was court. I nearly turned around. But then I saw Emma's little drawing taped to the window inside, the one she made of Grandpa's house. That crooked little chimney, the red door, her stick figure version of me holding a hammer. So I stayed. For 2 hours, they took turns tearing me down. Mom's pastor spoke about forgiveness and duty. My third-grade teacher quoted Bible verses about honoring one's parents. Dad's old secretary cried as she talked about how gracious my mother had been during the funeral. Lisa, hand protectively over her swollen stomach, talked about stress, her baby's future, unnecessary trauma. Steve just sat there, arms folded, smug and silent. It was a masterpiece in emotional warfare. Every memory, every bond, every ounce of my upbringing was thrown at me like a weapon. But they made a mistake. They talked about Dad. Again and again. Quoting him. Recalling him. Using his legacy as a weapon. And I couldn't take it. I stood up. "I've heard enough," I said. You all keep talking about my father, his values, his grace, his supposed wishes. But not one of you showed up when we buried him. You didn't sit with me through probate. You didn't see what Steve did to his home, his work, his history. People shifted uncomfortably. So I pulled out the photos. Steve's vinyl floors covering the original woodwork. The crown molding he ripped out. The shelves he demolished. The garage sale flyers listing Dad's antique tools for pennies. Then, I pulled out the letter. Dad's handwritten note to me, left in the estate file. Explaining why he left the house solely to me. Why he wanted it preserved. Why he trusted me to protect his life's work. The crowd went silent. A few old men, his former co-workers, nodded solemnly. One whispered he told me the same thing at lunch once. Said the boy understood what legacy meant. The pastor cleared his throat. Well, we didn't know about it. You didn't ask, I snapped. You just assumed I was the bad guy. One by one, they left. Some with a handshake. Some with shame in their eyes. Some still glaring. But they left. 3 days later, on the morning of the final deadline, I arrived with Mr. Whitaker and a locksmith. I'd also hired private security just in case. I wasn't taking chances. The house was quiet. Their stuff was packed. Steve's truck idled in the driveway, loaded with boxes and a cheap mirror that had replaced one of Dad's handcrafted vanities. Kelsey helped Lisa into the back seat. No one said a word. Except Steve. He looked at me, eyes narrow, jaw tight. You happy now? I didn't respond. He sneered. Your father would be ashamed of how you treated your own mother. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, no. He'd be ashamed of how she let you destroy everything you built. Mom refused to look at me. She got into the passenger seat, hands shaking. As they drove off, I felt a strange mix of grief, anger, and relief. Inside the house, I found what they'd left behind. Scratches in the floor from moving weights. Paint splatters on the brick fireplace Dad restored by hand. The Mustang posters torn off the garage walls. A coffee ring where Dad's chair used to sit. I sat down in the dust. And I wept. For my father. For my mother. For the version of me that thought family would always mean something sacred. The silence was unbearable at first. For the first time in over a year, the house was empty. No loud music from Mark's workouts. No scent of Steve's terrible cologne hanging in the hallway. No arguments in the kitchen over throw pillows or backsplash tiles. Just quiet. I thought that's what I wanted. But I wasn't ready for how it echoed. Emma ran through the hallways that weekend, oblivious to the past, laughing as she traced her fingers along the walls. Can we live here now, Daddy? She asked, her tiny voice cutting through the fog in my chest. I told her maybe. Truth is, I didn't know yet. The house was no longer a war zone, but it wasn't a home again, either. Not yet. That Monday, I called in a favor. 3 of Dad's oldest friends, Ralph, the retired master carpenter, Jerry, who used to run the finish shop, and Paul, who once helped Dad save a church bell tower from collapsing, showed up at sunrise. No fanfare, just tool belts and thermoses. They walked the property with me, nodding quietly, pointing out the damage. Jerry tapped the new vinyl planks and muttered, sinful. Paul opened the garage and just shook his head. This can be fixed, Ralph said finally, running his hand along the ruined workbench. Might not be what it was, but we'll get damn close. That's when I knew. I wasn't alone in this. We started with the garage. Every weekend, I was back in coveralls, sawdust in my beard, nails between my teeth. We rebuilt the pegboard first, matching every tool outline from an old photo Emma found on my phone. She colored it in with crayons. For Grandpa, she said. I told her he'd be proud. The Mustang's parking spot is still there, empty, but waiting. I'll get another project someday, maybe with Emma, if she wants. Not to relive the past, but to start a new story. Inside the house, we removed the crown molding Steve had butchered and replaced it with handcrafted replicas from Dad's original blueprints. I pulled the growth chart doorframe out of the dumpster and preserved the part with the markings. It's now a mounted piece of art in my study. Every scratch, every date, untouched. Mom. She moved in with her sister 2 towns over. We haven't spoken in months. She sent a Christmas card. It was signed, Love Always, Mom and Steve. No apology. No acknowledgement. Kelsey posted a photo of Lisa's baby on Facebook. The caption read, "This house will never be the same without Grandpa." I didn't comment. Let them have their stories. I have mine, and Emma will have hers. When she's old enough, I'll tell her everything. About the man who built with his hands and led with his heart. About the years I spent thinking I had to choose between peace and integrity. About the day I realized preserving someone's legacy sometimes means being the villain in someone else's tale. Dad used to say, "Character is what you do when no one's watching." Well, they were all watching, and I still did the right thing. Now, every Sunday, Emma, and I light the grill in the backyard, same spot where Dad used to stand. I built a new bench, modeled after his old one. We sit there, talking about everything and nothing. The house still creaks, but it finally breathes again.